Jonathan Lawless, a housing industry leader known for his bold vision and innovative thinking, joins us to tackle the burning questions shaping the future of construction lending. Get ready for a candid conversation that challenges conventional wisdom and offers a fresh perspective.
If you suddenly deport everybody who's building homes, the chance that you're going to create more homes is going to go down pretty substantially, which is why my idea has always been create a program. If you work on building American homes for 3 years, you get citizenship. And this is why I sort of point to offsite construction. If buying and building a home could be as easy as buying a car, where you pick a few packages, you pick what car you want, and you go pick it up, right? Then we could get rid of a lot of the sort of timelines and nonsense that we deal with construction today and make it just a lot easier for people to finance on it.
I'd like to welcome everybody to the Construction Lending Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Ferris from Land Gorilla. And today we've got a special guest, friend of mine that goes back, I think since 2016 when we first met. But I'd like to welcome Jonathan Lawless to the show. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you. Great to see you, Sean.
Great. And just for like a little recap on your background here. I know that we go back, but for everybody else that's listening, you're currently head of homeownership at Built Rewards. And, you know, for those that don't know, Jonathan's really passionate about making homeownership a reality for everybody, right? You've been in this business, 20 plus years in the housing industry. You've been at Fannie Mae. You've helped develop Home Ready and work with startups to make homeownership more affordable and accessible. Your expertise really lies in developing and, executing strategic plans, fostering innovation, delivering results that benefit individuals, communities, and businesses alike. And I can't say, just how much and how grateful I am to have you join us on the show today.
What was that again? Sorry. That was a great intro. Thank you, Sean. I appreciate it. It's great to be here. And I made the cardinal error of being on a podcast and not turning on my do not disturb. So I'm going to do that right now. Appreciate that quick background on me.
No. And you also have your own podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a little plug for my podcast, Housing Insiders, that I host with Jeremy Potter. It has an explicit rating on all the platforms for a good reason, so don't listen to it with your kids.
Now, how did you and Jeremy get all teamed up? Like, what's the background there?
Well, Jeremy and I go, similar to how we met. Jeremy was at Rocket Labs at the time, sort of leading product development over at Rocket. And, Fannie Mae and Rocket were often doing pilots and thinking about creative things together. And so Jeremy and I became great friends back then. And I think that started a conversation that hasn't ended. And we're constantly out there talking to interesting founders and interesting people in the lending universe, the policy universe. And we just figured that we were having so many fun and interesting conversations that, I think are actually really important and meaningful for us to have. And a lot of times we have sort of surface level discussions like, let's have another conversation about how we need more housing supply. And our thought was like, what if we could sort of have a little bit of a deeper level conversation with various people in the industry and then try to translate that into what that implies for founders and others. You want to start a company? Here's an idea, and just see how that plays. So it's been fun.
No, that's great. I remember, before me and you got hooked up and introduced, you were somewhat of a legend at Fannie Mae, and, we'd keep hearing, oh, Jonathan Lawless and all the time, we're like, who the heck is this Jonathan Lawless? And I, think back to some of our earlier meetings and introductions and, you were just built differently than other people and you thought differently. And it was like, oh man, you're a product guy, and I think that was, you had just started as the VP of product development and affordable housing or innovation, at that time. And it was just kind of an exciting, moment to hear somebody that thinks the way that you do.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah. The first half of my career was spent in analytics. Mm-hmm. So I kind of got to know the mortgage business and the housing finance industry really through the data, building models and doing all that type of thing. And so 2015, 2016, I had the opportunity to kind of restart our product team after the crisis. We had sort of shut down those activities and just had the chance to kind of go and start thinking about what's the right way to build products. We saw the wrong way, like products where you didn't have to pay your mortgage and then, your balance would increase. Those were sort of the wrong ways to doing products. And you could see that very clearly analytically. So the question was, what are some of the right ways to do it? And in 2015 too, you kind of remember that time was like the first time you heard like the term fintech, right? You had like SoFi coming out. And so it was a really great moment for innovation across the whole industry. And so for me, it was just great to kind of be a part of that from the Fannie Mae perspective, but also invite it into Fannie Mae, which, say what you want about Fannie Mae, it's not the fastest moving entity in the world, but finding interesting companies that are actually making a difference like yours was the way that I thought we really could expand our offerings and really improve the business.
Yeah, for those that don't know, when we talk about product leadership and what a product leader does, or somebody that works in product, especially from like the housing side, right? Somebody at Fannie Mae at the time, what does that actually mean? What were you doing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the thing that I would say that I probably did wrong was I probably overinvested in a lot of the product narrative of the time. And you'll remember like IDEO and the Stanford Design School and human-centered design, where it's like, hey, why don't we start with what the consumer really wants? And it ended up being this like bullshit that probably did more to like sell Post-it notes than actually create real products. And so I think people just had this sense of like product design is like this weird process where you have to go like sit with customers and in some sense that's true, but at the end of the day, like you don't really have to do that. I mean, we're all humans. We understand the human condition. We see when things don't work and we see where it needs to be fixed. The product role I had at Fannie was also unique in the sense that we weren't really building technologies. I mean, we were looking end to end at the ecosystem in which people bought homes and trying to see, what are some of the obstacles and frictions that's making it harder, particularly for those that are most disenfranchised, what's making it harder for them to buy homes and how do we fix it? And in a lot of cases, the answer is obvious, like this process really sucks. And that's where when people ask me what product is about, product's about execution. It's, the guy who figured out how to create a battery small enough to fit into the iPhone is as important as the idea of the iPhone itself, right? It's sort of like, how do you execute, and how do you execute in a highly regulated environment when you've got a policy manual that's, longer than War and Peace? How do you figure out how to make the right set of changes, work with the industry so that the changes can get to the consumers? I mean, that to me was really what product was all about at Fannie Mae.
And how did you guys, think about identifying the problems or prioritizing the problems to work on?
Yeah, I mean, in some cases it's obvious. I mean, I think by the time 2015 and 2016 came around, I had become pretty convinced that supply was going to be the biggest challenge. And we weren't really talking about it as an industry back then. I mean, you'd hear the occasional thing or two about supply. But I was kind of looking at the industry. I was like, there's no problem with demand. There's a lot of people that want homes. There's not really a problem with underwriting because we're not really rejecting a lot of people. Like, why aren't we seeing, as many low income buyers as we saw in the past? And it just became pretty clear that there weren't enough homes. So that became the priority. And then the question is, well, what are some of the ways that we in our position can fix it? And that led us down a lot of paths. I think the major path was where we intersected, which is, we offer construction, a permanent program. We offer a buy something and renovate it program, which was something that we saw was a huge issue. A lot of homes in disrepair that were being purchased by investors who had the money to fix them up, but average consumer couldn't buy it and renovate it. So how could we make those programs more effective and efficient? So I would say that really dominated. The other thing that can't go without saying is, when you're a highly regulated institution, your regulator has a large say in what you're going to do. And from 2015 to 2025, I'd say that, or 2024, the number of requirements from duty to serve and racial equity and affordable housing goals. I mean, I think Fannie Mae has like 127 objectives to deliver on just in those plans. So in 1 year. It becomes pretty clear that the regulator is going to have a heavy say in what you're doing too, which makes it a lot easier to prioritize in some ways.
No, it's in trying to stay ahead of it. When you're moving a bigger organization that's highly regulated, how do you get far enough ahead so you're not always chasing, what you should have been doing to prepare for the next thing, but you're actually working on it so it's going to be ready by the time it's needed.
100%.
How do you if you had to put that hat on right now, what are the problems that you see, happening out there today that need solution? Is it still a lot of the same around affordability and availability? How do you think about it today?
Whew. Yeah, I mean, sadly, the problems haven't changed. I mean, I think the problems that we were thinking back then, we don't have enough. We're not building enough homes. We don't have enough homes. It's very hard for low income, especially low income minority consumers to access housing. We have a housing gap between Black and white Americans that is persistently large as it was 50 years ago. So those problems have just kind of persisted. I would add to a problem now is like we just seem to keep wanting to try the same things or talk about the same things to fix those problems that, it's pretty clear they're not working. So I think what we really need is somebody to have a drastic change in approach. And I'll just give you an example. Like, why we're still talking about down payment assistance as a solution is beyond me. I mean, every shred of evidence has shown that usually people that get down payment assistance would have bought a home anyway. It doesn't really change where or how they're going to buy. So we're just we're literally just flushing away a lot of money. And potentially at the same time, if we did a sort of national scale program, we're going to make home prices go up, and it hurts everybody. So, why are we doing down payment assistance when there are alternatives? And I'll say I don't often say California did something good, but I'll say the California Dream for All was an interesting change of approach to giving people money. And what they did there, instead of giving away money as just a grant, the state is now making co-investments into a home. They're actually literally putting their money alongside the consumer's money, which they'll recapture when the home sells down the road. Great way of sort of introducing private capital into that approach. So that is a great evidence of how we can be creative. Why we're not doing that everywhere is, again, it's just crazy. So down payment assistance, and we can talk to each other about how awful zoning is forever. I don't think that's going to really change anything. In fact, if all the people complaining about zoning would just go out and build a house, we would be out of the supply crisis. And so, I just think we need a different approach than trying to, rezone neighborhoods that are really resistant to being rezoned.
I found it really fascinating. We did a lot of work on ADUs, and I like to phrase it as almost like this deregulation movement in housing, where they just took this one little area that can use improvement and tried to peel away all the things that were getting in the way, all these barriers and hoops you had to jump through, and permits and this and that, and what you can do and what your neighbor can say. And, I'm really impressed with the outcome there, and as that conversation starts to move towards, what they call the missing middle, the 2 to 4 units, and hey, you got a single family home, or zone for single family, you could go 2 to 4, and I think that's kind of an interesting next step. But at the end of the day, what kind of impact can that make? Hey, if we did that and applied it, could it make enough impact to win this game? And I don't know if that's the right solution. I don't know if the right solution's out there.
I think it's a good. The only thing I would say about ADU, I mean, again, I'm fully supportive of the changes that have been made on ADUs, and it's clear from the data in California that it has been providing a real source of growth in terms of housing and housing density. The thing that I can't quite get my arms around is ADUs is a great solution for policymakers who want more houses, but are ADUs really a solution for people who own houses or wanting to buy homes? So again, what is the real market demand for ADUs, and how deep is it? I hope it's very deep. And if it is, I think it'll be a great solution. But again, because the solution's it's not being driven per se by consumers, it's being driven by advocates and policymakers. I don't know if it's going to be that successful at a broad scale. But again, look, I think what's happening with ADUs is really great. Light density is a great thing. I think light touch density is what Ed Pinto at AEI would call it. Middle housing is, another term, as you say. I think it's all great. I just, something I think we talked about last time we talked, John, is this idea that we need to densify areas, to me is, it reminds me of a problem that I often have when I host parties. And you've probably had this sort of similar experience. When you host a party, if you're not having it catered, let's just say, everyone ends up hanging out in the kitchen, right? It's just like, and it's kind of weird. Like there's this invisible box that everybody just gravitates towards the kitchen. You're like shoulder to shoulder in the kitchen. And meanwhile, the rest of the house, you got hors d'oeuvres sitting out in the living room table and it's empty, right? And so I just really see where we kind of have that effect with housing. It's just like these really high cost markets. Everyone wants to be in those markets. They don't want to be anywhere else. They want to be in there. And as a result, more and more people are sort of shoving themselves into the so-called kitchen cities. I just don't know if I don't know if that's the answer. Like I'd rather give people more incentive to not try to shove themselves into these dense areas where, at some point density becomes cumbersome and not great for community and for lifestyle. And at that point, I would just rather have people move elsewhere where they get the amenities that they want. It's, they've got space, it's good for communities and families. Like to me, like that should be more of our focus in terms of building supply. And by the way, it's, in places where there's more space, it's also a lot less zoning restriction. And so, yeah, that's kind of become a view that I've been thinking about a lot lately.
Would, you mentioned supply. Would you say, out of all the problems, if we just had to pick one, it boils down to supply right now?
I guess, supply is a very tricky, it's a very tricky thing, right? I mean, it's, right now home prices are growing kind of slowly, right? Rates just went up and like now people are forecasting, 2 to 3% home price growth, depending on who you ask, right? It becomes pretty clear to me if you introduce a lot of supply into a sort of an environment where home prices aren't really growing, then home prices should go down, right? At the end of the day, right? So like how much supply do we really need is something I'm not quite sure of. And, I look at communities like Dayton, Ohio, and Dayton, Ohio is like half empty as a city. I mean, they have an abundant oversupply of homes in that city. And if you said we have a supply problem, they would literally see it as exactly the opposite. We have too many rundown neighborhoods that need torn down. So I think supply is just kind of a funny term that's not really well understood because it captures so many different dynamics in the market, where people live, where they want to live, where they want to work, what's happening with remote working, what's happening with the Midwest versus the coast. I mean, there's just so much that goes into this supply is the problem thing that we talk about. If I were to state the problem is, again, I think we shove ourselves too much into kitchen cities that are mismanaged and they can't create supply, nor can they create transportation to facilitate the type of growth those cities need to have to accommodate everybody who wants to live there, right? Not everybody can live in Austin. So I think what we need to do is create a lot of new cities and find old cities and reinvigorate them, make really cool walkable neighborhoods, build some tremendously beautiful homes, and then tell companies like, stop trying to move your company to Austin. We've just built this amazing place where your employees can buy a home for half of what it would cost there. It's walkable, it's family friendly, move here instead, move your company here instead. I think that to me is, if we could take advantage of the space we have as a country, that would be a great solution.
No, I like that. It always seems like there's kind of a trend of, hey, what's going to be the next city or the next state that's going to be hot? It was Austin, Texas, and then it was Nashville, Tennessee, and is it Big Sky, Montana next? What are we thinking? That's going to be incentivizing businesses and it's affordable for people to live there, and they really love the communities. And then it seems like they get overpopulated like Austin, and now Austin's not the place you want to go to because it's overcrowded and housing's inflated and, they got all these problems and, and I shouldn't say they have all these problems, but, they it comes with change. So, you get an idea. Is that what you're saying? Is like, hey, let's, instead of doing one at a time, let's focus on many of them. Let's grow some of these other communities or other cities.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to imagine how to do that, but I think, your example of Austin, I mean, the problems are just a direct, like if you do a thought exercise and say, take any city and imagine that the population doubles in size within a year. Of course, that's extreme, but like, just think about what would happen. Like traffic would get awful and there'd be no homes. And so you'd have to build homes up or down or sideways. You have to expand the city. And so you can do that in America over 200 years, You can't do it in 20 years. And I think that that's kind of what's happening is like cities become popular. Everyone moves there. At some point, it just starts bursting at the seams. And instead of people moving elsewhere, it starts gaining attention. Oh, home prices are going up by 20% in Austin. There's a cool new restaurant in Austin. My company's moving to Austin. We're hiring from Austin. And then suddenly it just gets worse and worse and worse. And we just have to have the instinct of like, why are we doing that? Why are we moving our companies to cities where the average commute time is 40 minutes each way? It's baffling.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And forcing people to return to the office, I think, is another sort of thing that's kind of making that worse. Everybody should be in the office 5 days a week. Okay, well, now everybody that just moved 2 hours away from the office because for the last 5 years they've been able to work remotely. Well, now they're gonna have to find a home in the city. Like, what are you doing? Or they're gonna have to drive 2 hours down. I mean, I know people that do this. Like, they have to go into the office and it takes them an hour each way. Like, oh, this is crazy. That's 2 hours of productivity that we're just flushing because we want people in the office. Don't get me started on that.
Yeah, no, that's pretty crazy. It's, for our listeners that may not have a sense of time, when this is recorded, we're coming off the election. We're about a week after, almost a week, exactly a week, just over a week now from the presidential election. Trump has won. It seems like every day there's a new video or new announcement or new letter on kind of intention, and some of that policy is starting to take shape. When we were kind of discussing the podcast before we started recording, we were kind of going over our subjects and kind of getting a good little outline. And it was kind of interesting because, everything that we kind of talked about, whether it was affordability or AI or, deregulation, what's kind of in store, almost seems like this president will touch in one way or another, for good, better, worse, whether you like it, whether you're not, it's highly impacted. What are your thoughts of, what we can see out of this administration, John?
There's so much to unpack, and there's so much uncertainty with how some of these things play out. I mean, we'll start with what JD Vance talked about as the biggest issue in housing, which was obviously sort of out of left field, I think, in that debate. But illegal immigration was what he pointed to as an issue. And, now the Trump administration seems very keen on mass deportation of illegal immigrants, of which there are roughly 11 million in this country. And, several million of them have come in the last few years. I think the way somebody put it to me that was kind of interesting is we've seen as much immigration in the Biden administration as the entire state of Arizona, which is incredible. There's a lot of people. Now, if there is some success in deporting, let's call it 2 million illegal immigrants, there's two questions that we have to ask. Number one is, how many units of housing were they actually taking up? I don't know, let's say they're living 10 to 1 unit. That's 200,000 units of housing is something. Maybe if it's 5 to 1, it's 500,000 units of housing. I mean, those are meaningful numbers. Obviously that won't be
when you think
out.
through that, are you thinking rentals, or are you thinking homes that have been purchased that will go into foreclosure because there's nobody making the payment?
It's a great question. It's probably more likely rentals, but I have no idea. And to that point, like, where are they? Are they in places where other people want to live, or are they in Dayton, Ohio, where nobody's going to buy those homes when they go back in the market? So I think that's one side effect. But the other question is, like, what jobs do they have? Are they actually supporting the construction industry? Because if you suddenly deport everybody who's building homes, the chance that you're going to create more homes is going to go down pretty substantially, which is why my idea has always been create a program. If you work on building American homes for 3 years, you get citizenship, or do something extreme like that. I mean, it feels like we've got all these people in the country that aren't supposed to be here, and we really need labor to build homes. Like, it feels to me like you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone by cross-pollinating it. I doubt we'd see anything like that from a Trump administration who seems very bent on just expunging the problem versus trying to, do something rational. Not that that's irrational, but anyway. So that's, that's one big area. I think the second is tariffs. For the Trump administration, they're going to have to show some decrease in the cost of living. I mean, that was such a big campaign issue. And if you raise tariffs, like that should have a direct impact on things coming into the country, which is going to raise people's prices. It could also increase the price of building. I've seen some interesting analysis on like how many things we import to build homes and what tariffs can do to the cost of just the pure input to homes. So again, raising the cost of homes or rental homes, whatever, is just gonna hurt pricing. So how will that be fixed? Is that through some drastic energy policy that will reduce the cost of energy as an input? I don't know. But in some ways, after 4 years, this administration is going to have to figure out how to have that whole mixture of interest rates, energy costs, tariffs result in lower cost of living for everybody. I think doing that through housing is going to be really hard. The other things that the Trump administration most likely will focus on is getting the GSEs out of conservatorship, which was something they tried to do before. I think they will try and most likely succeed in this next 4 years. What that does, I don't know. Lord knows. Depends on how they do it. If it raises prices a few bips on the G fee, it's not going to matter relative to the broader interest rate. Yeah, I think those are the main ones. I don't know what they're going to do on zoning. Trump made a few comments early in his campaign about protecting the American suburbs, which to me, is a thinly veiled way of saying like not undoing zoning. But I don't know. The last thing I'll say, I'll kind of end on this note. I was reading an interesting article in the New Yorker talking about how the pro-life movement post-Roe is sort of moving into a pro-family movement. And you see that really with a lot of J.D. Vance's comments and a lot what you're seeing on the conservative right. And a pro-family stance doesn't, in this sort of Republican administration, does not mean getting the government out of families. It might actually mean getting the government involved in a way that's conducive to having families. So what I've been trying to think through with relation to that is, what does a family-friendly housing policy look like? Because at this kind of unique moment in time, we have the millennial generation coming of age, getting married, having kids, and finding that, 800 square foot cool apartment in downtown whatever city is not really conducive to that lifestyle. And so they're trying to figure out where to live. And they're trying to figure out if they could ever have a second kid, right? I mean, all these things are becoming a real issue. And so if you want to create a family-friendly community, how do you do that? Like, what does that look like? Is it reinvesting in suburbs? Is it building new suburbs, building new cities, to my earlier point? But I do think the conservative part of the parties, should or could focus on this idea of what a family-friendly community is.
Yeah, no, it's going to be really, I think the one thing, that we're in for sure, without a doubt, there's going to be a lot of change, right? Yeah. I think, the names that we see floating around, I think as of yesterday, it was Elon Musk and Vivek for the Department of Government Efficiency.
Doge. Yeah.
Doge. And I'm like, all right, and some of the thing, disassembling the Department of Education and reducing the federal budget by, I think it was like 2/3 is what they were estimating. That's going to come at an impact. Can they do it? I think Musk has definitely demonstrated his impact before, but with those kind of changes, you get some disruption. And it almost feels like, hey, we're going to go in and be as methodical as we can, but these are large, huge, big budget items like you've never seen before. You may break some things, and that does have some impact there. And historically, it always seems like, there's always a crisis or a war or, a housing crash or, something that impacts us every few years. It's going to be interesting to ride this wave and just kind of go through, see what breaks, what works, fingers crossed. I'm rooting for him in every way, shape or form that, we get some good change out of this.
What do you hope to see from a land griller perspective? Is there a optimism that the policy could change in your direction?
I think for land grill, I think interest rates are always a big thing. I don't like to focus on interest rates, on a day-to-day thing, but I think some historical, just consistency, and I think we have an aging in place problem where people are sitting with interest rates that are really, really low. And, as we start to realize like, hey, the housing supply issue is much, much worse. So what are the options that are out there? What I would like to see is, some real work towards creating new housing, whether it's mobilizing Fannie and Freddie in a way that, taking them out of conservatorship may, let them innovate more, may let them experiment with programs, may let them purchase construction loans, when the loan closes rather than when the project's completed. Little things like that, I think, add up for Land Gorilla. I think the deregulation movement, I think that's really an important component here where, we've seen it, how, death by a million cuts. And, especially in California where you really can't do anything until you've checked a million boxes and jumped through a million hoops, and still your neighbor comes over and says, I don't like the color of your house, and I'm going to set you back 6 months and add to your carrying costs and expenses to change. Those are kind of the things that, that we get, that I personally get interested in. And I think Land Gorilla, it's more program availability. It's more making sure that the liquidity's out there, that, banks, mortgage companies credit unions all feel comfortable making construction loans, that they're able to operate in an environment that is supportive. You think about, some of the changes that came out of the Obama administration, the CFPB, and the fear that they struck amongst lenders out there. Nobody wanted to make a construction loan because it wasn't consistent rules that people could abide by, and it took a while for them to get those published. And, I think things like that, where it's more knee jerking, uncertainty, have a big impact. And, if they could do this in a way where we see some consistent change, some good foreshadowing that the change is going to come, some time to prepare for that change, I think that would be great. And I also think it would be great if they were, honest that the change could have some negative impact. Like, hey, these changes are going to be, could be painful, but they're necessary for this reason. So I think some trust needs to be earned here, in the way that they go about, doing some of these things. But it's definitely a kind of a day-to-day, interesting experience. I'm really curious. I think the unknown for me is energy costs. If we're out of the Ukraine war, if they get, peace back in the Middle East, if those things kind of resolve themselves pretty quickly, one of the massive drivers of inflation, every inflation conversation comes with that little, excluding energy costs, right? And they do that because energy cost is the big thing that touches everything in the supply chain that jacks up a lot of those prices. That's why, people that complain about eggs at the grocery store, it's like, yeah, they may have gone up 20%. It's like, well, when you add energy into the supply chain, that's pushing a lot of that up. So what kind of change would there be if energy productivity in the US increases and then we have availability from other countries because the war stopped? What kind of impact does that have? Does it help bring inflation down?
That seems to be what the Trump administration is betting on, right? I mean, it is the quickest and easiest way to impact inflation is lowering energy costs. But you just worry about, he fires Powell, he tries to lower interest rates, he spends a bunch of money, and suddenly you've got this problem where like short-term interest rates are low, but long-term interest rates are getting higher because everyone's expecting, inflation to just like take off like a rocket after a few years of sort of hyper spending. So yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of uncertainty, but you mentioned a few things. I mean, one of the things that I really like is this idea that the GSEs can get involved more in construction financing. I think it takes away a lot of risk from builders. GSEs actually, back in the 80s, when you had the sort of savings and loans issues and you were struggling to get financing for construction, they actually stepped in and did full acquisition development construction financing. And people forget that, but like by charter, Fannie Mae can go and do that. And should they, that could be a really interesting way to, again, lower some of the cost of building, but I think also make people more willing to take the risk of doing developments and things like that if you can kind of take some of that risk away. And the other thing, I'm curious to get your point of view on this. I've thought a lot about this particular one. So one of the other challenges that's like zoning are building codes. So every municipality across the country gets to set like what it thinks appropriate building codes are for its area. The only place that's not true is for manufactured housing, which is established by HUD, nationally. But, these building codes can be really inane. Like in Montgomery County, just north of where I live in DC, requires every new home to have a sprinkler system. And so, why? If fires are not more prevalent there than there are other places right next to it. So I think the sort of complexity in how we build homes is just exacerbated by the fact that we have all of these different ways of building homes. So I've often wondered, can the government have a role of sort of encouraging more consistency in building codes, right? Now, I get there are climate zones, and I think there are 6 major climate zones where you have flooding and fires, and like there are reasons for different building codes in different building areas, but it shouldn't be every community gets to decide. And so, but anyway, my point is, like, could the government create sort of the 5 standard building codes that every municipality should use and create incentives for following them? And part of the reason I say that is because it's just really depressing how bad we've done at adopting offsite construction technology. I mean, you look at Japan where it's 50% of production, or, the Nordic countries where it's 30% of production. Here it's like 4%. Like, what are we doing? Like, we're one of the most advanced technological societies, and we can't figure out how to build homes. In fact, this is something I wish Elon would get really interested in, is like, how do we create a home as a product as opposed to like this cumbersome, awful service that it is today. And we really build houses just to last forever too, which is, I think, stupid, because all these homes from the 1960s look terrible now and they're falling apart, but like, hey, we built it in a way that you could just like go into the walls. Anyway, like I just think if we could get offsite construction to really work and we could just create a lot of new housing, it would be amazing. And that is only really possible if you create some consistency in building codes, which, maybe this administration has the willingness to try to enforce something like that.
Well, I'm going to ask you this question a little later on, but one of my favorite questions to ask somebody is like, hey, you get one wish, but it has to impact housing in a positive way. What would be that wish? And you could chew on that, but when I was asked that question, if I could make one big contribution, one big wish, I believe that we have this army out there of loan originators and banks and credit unions and independent mortgage bankers, even private money lenders, that are in this space too. I think if Fannie or Freddie created some sort of conforming loan product where they're buying that construction loan, when the loan closes, and there's structure to it and safety and it's insured, and I think that could be one of the biggest impacts, because you're putting all of those people to work. You're incentivizing them to go out and do what they do best. The machine already exists. You're just creating the product that can ride through the machine. And I think there could be, meaningful impact in the areas that are going to benefit from it. So that's my, thought to that is, hey, use the infrastructure that's out there, use the people that are out there, and give them what they're asking for. I don't think there's an originator out there that thinks that's a bad idea, or, removing recourse to the home style product, all the way through if it's done to a certain standard, and, or home choice, if you're Freddie Mac, going the Freddie Mac path. So, I just think that could be huge compared to, some of these, either a tax incentive for first time home buyer. It's like, yeah, we're going to make a little bit of impact and it's not right for everybody, but at least with new construction, you're freeing up some of the existing homes for, and let people build as big as they want. You want to go spend your money on that? That's the American dream. You're more than welcome to that. You shouldn't have to sit in a smaller house that you don't want because you were told you have to do that, because it's going to free up their existing home and let somebody move into that. I think all of that activity helps.
I totally agree. The one thing too, I would say, and part of the reason you and I were working together back in 2016 was this vision that it shouldn't be so damn hard for a lender to make a loan on a construction project. Mm-hmm. And the reason that it's hard is because the construction process is not usually dictated by technology. It relies on, all sorts of contractors and subcontractors who have, high unpredictability. And there's something like when we looked at our renovation lending at Fannie Mae, it was like 30% of the time it was over budget or over time. Like like that's not Six Sigma. That's, that's negative Six Sigma, right? It's like, it's an incredibly bad outcome. So, my thought is, and this is why I sort of point to offsite construction. If buying and building a home could be as easy as buying a car, where you pick a few packages, you pick what car you want, and you go pick it up, right? Then we could get rid of a lot of the sort of timelines and nonsense that we deal with construction today, and make it just a lot easier for people to finance on it. But today, and to your point, I'm fully supportive of this concept of let rich people go build nice new homes and leave their old home behind. That actually will be good for supply. It doesn't seem like the best way to create affordable housing, but it actually
works.
Can really work. Yeah, but if I, for example, had the opportunity to go build a home, now I'm faced with this 2-year uncertain process. I don't know who's going to build it, what's going to look like. I'd much rather be able to go online, design a house, have it feel inspiring, like the car I just bought is inspiring, and the next generation of technology and next generation look. If that were possible, I'd be much more willing to consider it. But the way we build homes today, it just seems like an impossible chore for me to undertake the task of building a home, not to mention renovating a home, which we've got to fix that.
You want to go in and build your Tesla, and you want to pick which package you get, and you want to have it shipped to your house, and
yeah, that's right.
Click one button and it's done.
In my case, a Rivian, but yeah.
Okay. Hey, there you go. I love those cars. All right. So I'll we'll skip ahead. We're nearing the end of the podcast, and we normally do this rapid fire section. So I'll lead with the question to you is, you could snap your fingers, you get one wish, but you only get one. What is the change you would make?
Yeah, I mean, I think really kind of creating this cultural norm of repopulating the middle of the country. I just, the fact that we are just shoved into these expensive coastal places, it just doesn't seem like the right way for us to live as a society, where commute times are long. It's just not the most effective sort of, I do believe in density, but it's just you gotta, at some point you just gotta spread out. And I would love to see, states like Michigan and Ohio, start attracting talent and start rebuilding some of those old cities. And that would be, I think it would solve so many problems that we have as a country.
That would be amazing. Absolutely amazing. I'd love to see how that would actually work. If you got to give a couple businesses incentives to kind of diversify the workforce to get them to move on in, I think that'd be pretty neat to see, how to implement something like that, or actually get the pendulum moving. All right. Question number 2.
Yeah.
Recent product that you have, discovered that you can't live without, and to me, I don't know where it went. I'm drinking from my wife's, friend's coffee mug, but the Ember mug, absolute one of my favorites. I always hated how my coffee changed temperature, and now it just stays at 142 degrees the entire first sip to last sip. Right, love it. What has it been for you?
Mine's set to 135. But yeah, I love that. I will say, so I'm a huge fan of AI. I've been spending a lot of time testing and using different products. The one that I just love right now is Google's Notebook LM, which is just so much fun. And just, a lot of times I have to research a topic. Sometimes I'll be writing articles for something, and to be able to upload a huge number of documents and just have it create, first of all, great summaries, which is also super useful, but it also can create a podcast, which is one of the most unreal things. It's just like a podcast with 2 people. It sounds real. It's super accurate, discussing whatever topic you happen to have uploaded. And that to me has been a lot of fun and super useful.
It's my favorite feature. Did you see now where you can go in and you could customize the direction of the podcast?
I have not seen that. Is that available now?
Oh. It's available. It's available now. And I also noticed we ran it on, we had it create another podcast of the exact same thing. And I had downloaded the podcast and compared the two, but the accuracy is a lot better now than when they first launched. And it's one of the coolest AI tools, I think, that are out there, Google Notebook LM. But when I originally saw that podcast feature demo, did you see how they demoed it where you can interact with the podcast and ask it live questions?
I did not see that. I love it. I love it.
I think they had done an example where it was talking about physics, and the head of engineering goes, "Hey, this is great, but my son here would really loves basketball. Can you do this along the lines of like some basketball analogies for him?" And it goes, "Do do do." Yeah, hey, Sean, that's a great question. Now, what we're going to hear is talk about how basketball and engineering play and physics play, hand in hand.
Yeah,
and we're going to use
amazing.
the analogy of a bouncing basketball. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I would use that for, but it is so dang cool.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about ways of using it at Built, and just, I just, the ways you can think about how features like that could really influence services and how people think about buying a home, the process of home buying. I mean, it's legit. And that one is just, I mean, that one's fun on top of it. So
we've loaded it with guidelines to use, questions. It's like, okay, hey, tell me about the 203K program on how this changed from this version to this version. And it just pulls the information out, and it reads all 1,000+ pages. And, it's just amazing. It's
hard to imagine that it could ever do a podcast as good as this one, though. I mean, that's
I'm blushing. Now you have me blushing. For the next question, have you, and this is kind of a 2-part question, have you ever built your own home?
No.
Would you ever build your own home with a construction loan?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think if I do move, I think the move or decide to have a second home, I absolutely think building my own would be the way I'd want to go. And leverage new technology, leverage new modular, I mean, some of the stuff they're doing is just so incredible. I think it'd be awesome to use that.
Oh, that'd be so cool. Just to geek out and build my own home. And God, I don't know if I can work while I'm doing that. I think it'd be so into the details, and it'd be fun.
Totally.
Last question here. Promise this is the last question. What do you see as the biggest challenge, 10 years from now when it comes to housing? Where do you see the biggest challenges when we look a decade out?
Yeah, I think probably a decade out, our solutions for supply will actually finally start working, and we'll realize that we didn't really have a supply problem that like we thought we did. Like we'll have figured out ways to work around it, and I think we're going to be faced with an oversupply of homes. So we'll have faced 10 years of sort of slow and moderate home price growth, only to face another 10 years of slow to moderate home price growth, which will just make housing just way less sexy than it has been for the last 20 years. So I think that's kind of the problem. We're just going to be in the middle of this like long, miserable stretch of housing kind of going nowhere. And then, trying to figure out how to get rid of supply, or I think it's going to be a problem in 10 years.
Oh man. Super interesting. Now, if somebody wants to reach out to you, they found you super interesting, and they're like, "Oh man, this John guy, gotta talk to him." What's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
LinkedIn is great, but lawless@builtrewards.com is my email at Built. We didn't even get to talk about Built. Someday we'll do that. But yeah, that either way works.
Another podcast.
Sounds good, man.
Well, John, thank you so much for jumping on here. Always an absolute pleasure, and can't wait to have you on here again. And the conversation is just phenomenal. So we'll go ahead and include your contact information here with the podcast, but can't thank you enough for joining us today.
Hey, so glad to be here, Sean. Best to you and the whole team at Land Grill. I love what you guys are doing, and best of luck with the holiday season.
You too as well. Thanks, John.
Cheers. Bye.
This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only and does not replace independent professional judgment. Land Gorilla Inc. makes no representations, warranties, or promises for and disclaims any express or implied warranties related to content. Before acting on any information, you should consider the appropriateness of the information as it pertains to your unique business needs.